Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 2nd, 2008 meeting, joint meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority. Mr. Kasakian, if you could call the roll for the council, please.
Council members Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Mayor Draymond.
Here.
Mayor, roll call for agency, please.
For the Housing Authority, members Draymond.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Brazian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Yusefian.
Here.
Mr. Kasakian, could we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the December 2nd, 2008 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Wednesday, November 26, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And let's hear the item at 1A, please. 1 and 1A.
The item on the agenda at 1 is Director of Community Development and Housing regarding proposed community garden project to be located at 870 Monterey Road in the city of Glendale. At 1A is the council motion approving the lease of the property to the Los Angeles Community Garden Council for the purpose of establishing a community garden and authorizing city manager to execute the necessary documents.
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Who are we going to with this?
I'll make some introductory comments.
Let's go to Madeline Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council Housing Authority, you have before you the opportunity to enter into a lease agreement with the Los Angeles Community Garden Council, who's quite experienced in developing community gardens around Los Angeles. The Neighborhood Services Department of Community Development and Housing has been in discussions with this group as well as the local group, which is really taking responsibility for putting together designs for community gardens in Glendale. And so at this time, I'll ask Sam Engel, Neighborhood Services Administrator, to talk about what they are proposing and discuss the terms of the lease.
Thank you, Madeline. Mr. Engel.
Mayor Draymond, Chair Yusefian, members of the City Council and the Housing Authority. As Mrs. Blake said, the item before you is an approval to lease public property located at 870 Monterey Road to the Los Angeles Community Garden Council for development into a community garden for use by Glendale residents. Last June, members of the City Council were contacted by representatives of the Coalition for Green Glendale. This group was requesting initially to develop a demonstration garden for low water and California-friendly landscaping. As a secondary part to this project, they proposed to develop a garden plot which could be used as a community garden for persons in Glendale to grow their own produce in the manner of a sustainable community. They requested that the city identify certain locations where this might be done. Staff looked at a number of locations, looking through the inventory of vacant land, predominantly in the flatland portion of the city, recognizing that there are less than 60 vacant lots in the southern portion of the city, and very few of those are publicly owned. As a result, the Monterey Road site was identified as being immediately available and could be utilized for such a purpose fairly quickly. Staff met with the representatives of the Public Works Department to get a tentative authorization to use that, subject to council approval, and begin meeting with representatives of the coalition so they could begin planning the community garden. There's some slides up here as we go. There's a title slide. Let's move on to the second slide. They're real quick. There's the Coalition for Green Glendale. This is the location. It's at 870 Monterey Road. It is a conglomeration of the remnants of 5 parcels that were left over at the time the 134 freeway went through. That property was sold at the time to a succession of private landowners. Eventually the city purchased it from a property owner whenever the on-ramp to the 134 West was expanded approximately 15 years ago. The city has owned it, and it has remained vacant and a maintenance problem for the city since that time. This is the current condition of the property, and actually looks pretty good in that slide compared to how it looks sometimes. Coalition members put together a development plan and secured a relationship with the Los Angeles Community Garden Council to act as an operator of the community garden. Los Angeles Community Garden Council is incorporated as a nonprofit organization and is an operator of community gardens throughout the city of Los Angeles, and actually leases property from a number of public agencies, including the MTA. In staff's assessment, the Coalition for a Green Glendale had a well-thought-out implementation plan which served to provide a needed service to this community, and being operated by a community-based organization could be done at a minimal cost to the city. We also felt that the Los Angeles Community Garden Council, having experience doing such projects for many years with the City of Los Angeles and throughout the county, offered us the opportunity to bring that experience in and function as a local operator. We've worked with them now to bring this project forward. You can see up here, this is the basic site plan that their members developed. In your handouts, you can also get a close-up of some of the photos of the property, and this is kind of a location drawing. Let's move on to the next slide. They developed a plan for this particular parcel, and based on what they originally approached the city to do, it ended up being a parcel we felt worked pretty well for them on their original concept. Remember, their original concept was a demonstration garden for xeriscopic, California-friendly, and drought-tolerant plants, which would go on the, if you look at this is kind of a, depending on whether you look at it as a D or a P, the upright of the D or the letter P is a vacant strip of land along Monterey Road, which could serve as that demonstration part, working in conjunction with our Water and Power Department to show what could be done with low water irrigation or low water plantings requiring very little irrigation. The remnant part of the parcel, or down adjacent to the freeway on the lower part where you see the little bars, which are actually the gardens, could be developed into a community garden plan, and they're available here to talk to you about some of the ideas that they came up with. Let's go to the next slide. Just a artist rendering by the landscape architect who's part of the coalition, Guillaume Lemoyne, put this together. Looking, if you're facing east on Monterey Road, with the entrance and the actual parcel, you see the palm trees, if you're familiar with the on-ramp in the background that line the on-ramp going onto the 134 freeway. Looking east, and there you go. This is a scene of another community garden that is developed similar to what this community garden is proposed to be, with raised beds. This is similar to what they look. You also see the fruit trees in the background, which are also being proposed by the Coalition for Green Glendale. The terms of the lease, as Mrs. Blake talked about, are a 5-year lease agreement. In working with Los Angeles Community Garden Council, because of the investment in the development of property, and while a community garden is not a large investment, there is, for a nonprofit organization to develop an infrastructure to support and secure community gardens, there is somewhat of an investment, and they requested a 5-year lease. Looking at the fact that the property has been vacant for some 34 years, we felt that it was fair to recommend to you a 5-year term of a lease agreement at $1 a year. The Public Works Department had indicated to us there is no future use anticipated for this piece of property at any time soon, I should say at all. We felt that this was another opportunity here. Looking down the road, there are a couple of opportunities. I'll give you the opportunity yourselves to meet this really energetic membership of the Coalition for Green Glendale. They are looking at this as a pilot project that's relatively small to do, and really looking on some of the dreams that we've heard expressed from your membership about doing these things community-wide. And they are excited about that possibility and recognizing that there may be other sites that we can look at, and are certainly looking to the City Council for direction on that, even though that's not a part of our staff report today. That is a brief synopsis of where we are. We have one of the officers from Los Angeles Community Garden Council here to answer your questions, Mr. Glenn Dake. He is a volunteer for them. They don't, just like most nonprofits, they operate with a volunteer board of directors and volunteer officers. We also have the entire Coalition for Green Glendale here, and I'd like them to stand. They're right here. Guillaume Lemoyne, Anna Kachatrian, Garan Nadir, and Alec Petrosov. Close enough. There they are. And I did that without looking at my notes, actually. Anyway, they've done a great job doing this, and they are truly the energy behind this, and they have been inspiring to your staff to be motivated to push this along, to get it to you where you can consider what's in front of you today. We're here to answer any questions and assist you with your discussions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Engel. May go to Mr. Quintero and then Mr. Yusefian.
Well, let me start by saying I'm very excited about this project, and this is something that actually isn't new to Glendale. In the late 70s and early 80s, under the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, the CETA program, and Sam's got a big grin on his face, we had multiple gardens like this throughout Glendale. People participated. It really was a super positive. I don't remember too many negative experiences as a result of that endeavor. So I'm glad we're back. And I'm not particularly happy about that location in the sense that, boy, is it rough. I want to commend the Coalition for Green Glendale. I think they want it so bad that they're willing to take a horrible, horrible location. Hopefully the second location will be a better site and maybe more towards the southern portion of the city. But anyway, I'm there all the time. I use that entrance to the freeway quite often, or I'm going in the other direction. And it will absolutely be a positive situation for that parcel of land and for the neighborhood in general. That rendering is going to wind up looking a heck of a lot better than what we have now. So anyway, I'm glad we're doing it, and hopefully we're going to find another location for you that you can get started on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Yusefian and Mr. Weaver.
What's the zoning on this property?
It is residential.
R1?
It's either R1, it's probably R1. I don't know what the zoning is right now.
R2 or R3?
It's one of the residential zones.
You had the rendering of it with all the fence in the front?
The fence is actually, by the way, the parcels are laid out are on the side setback. We haven't proposed to eliminate to replot the land for that very reason. It would then leave a barrier fence on the side setback of the underlying parcel.
Okay, so it's not going to require a variance?
No, because it's not the front property line of the underlying parcel.
Okay, since this is not a residential use, would it require a use variance?
It would be similar to our open space. I would imagine if we wanted to look at it long-term, we probably could look at that. My concern with any type of variance with the land on a temporary use, the variance runs with the land, and that's why we haven't proposed it.
But this is not a variance, it's a use variance.
Variance?
Well, rather than quiz,
we
Mr.
haven't
Engel,
proposed it,
we have
Mr. Yusefian, we haven't proposed
city attorneys and
Okay.
assistant city attorneys sitting here. Would either of you care to take a stab at that question instead of putting Sam Engel on the spot with a legal question?
Well, and it's
like
it's really
this
what's in the
format.
code. I would have to review the code, and I can run and get my code and check that.
Okay,
while
I think
we're
the answer is
discussing
they'll
the
check
issue.
that out.
okay. I'll tell you why I asked for, one is actually for something we're going to deal with it tonight on the issue of use variance in residential areas. But nevertheless, the other reason that I brought this up is I don't have an issue with the concept. I think it's a very good concept. I like the new drawings because I did go, this is not, I read the paper and it was said, this is the first one we've done in Glendale, Palmer Park, and this is what it looks like. And I hope to God it doesn't look anything like this because this is atrocious. And if I'm living in any of the apartments right behind this, which is right in here, and you have to look at this, I shoot myself. I feel like I live in Barrio somewhere. This is ridiculous. So whoever's in charge, this needs to be cleaned up. The fences are like in 15 different colors, chicken wire and so on and so forth. That needs to be cleared up. but the design that you have provided, I think it's a lot nicer design, and I hope that it stays like that. I'll tell you what I have my main concern is, I don't know who wrote the staff report, by the way. Numbers are all over the place. From 9, it's just all over the place. Nevertheless, there are parts of the staff reports that's not accurate. That property was purchased in the 90s from Sal Ganji for over $400,000. And at the time, I think the only person who bitched and complained about it was Carl Raggio.
Is that the technical term, by the way?
Yeah, well, it is, because he did. And he was wondering why we bought it. We bought it for one purpose, and the purpose was to basically take about 12 feet of the frontage right there to widen the street to the freeway entrance. That was part of the reason that purchase property was bought. Originally, there were supposed to be two houses on that site. So the city paid $400,000 to buy that. The reason I don't like that location is because community gardens, I did a little research myself, and I talked to our mayor who had done a lot more research than I have. Community gardens are in the community. It's in residential area. And this is a place that you walk to. You don't drive to. Where are you going to park? Right next to the freeway entrance? And you're going to put this thing right next to the busiest freeway entrance with all the pollution. And one thing that, as I talked to staff today, which they told me, there is no other site, this is it, or you have to go somewhere else, which had all kinds of legal issues, right there. It's an empty lot, it's right next to the wash,
Sam, this is the
and
site.
it's big, and we just found out about 10 minutes ago before we came in here that it's owned by the city. And guess what? You can't build anything on top of it because the wash, it actually a flood control channel goes underneath it. So the only thing you could really do is plant something on it. Gee, isn't that great? It's not next to the freeway. It's not on corner. It's up in here. You could actually park in here and actually go there, and you can walk there. So I'm for the gardens. I will vote against this location, but I will vote for this location, which is like about 200 feet away from it, and it'd probably be cheaper for us because there's water there already. Because there were houses that we tore down a long time ago because of the flood control channel that county had to put in there. That's my thing, and I hope whatever we do when this gets done doesn't look anything like this, and I hope this issue is remedied also at one point.
Thank you, Mr.
My comments?
Gibson. Thank you. Mr. Weaver.
Yeah, I'm kind of along in the same area. I'm going to vote for it because I know it can always be stopped if we find there's problems. I missed in the back. There's 20 parcels or plots.
Yes.
That's what I counted there.
Yes, Councilman
Well, that
Weaver.
means 20 families will be able to go in there, right?
Yes, there's the possibility, as are done at other community gardens, there's sometimes those plots are divided in half. That's not the ideal situation.
It could
You
be
could have
40.
as many as 40, but that typically it'll probably be 24 to 26.
My main problem again, where's the parking? You're going to go up in the residential streets where we already had to deal with traffic loadings on those streets, where we're going to have residents coming down to complain. These people that are working on their plots are parking on residential street. There's no room. I don't know how often they're going to have to come down, once a day, once a week. You're not going to park on a busy street like that we got there. So, but I'm willing to try it on for size. Some years ago, we were told, I think, there was less than 50 vacant parcels of land left in the city of Glendale. And there's many fewer today. Virtually every parcel of this flat land has been taken. One of the densest urban cities in America. You know that. So where do you find it? The only place I know, and it's not there yet, is when the western off-ramp off the 5 freeway is realigned. There will be vacant parcels along the freeway on both sides where the off-ramp, on and off-ramp are now. Maybe one of those could be devoted to a community garden if we want to go there. But, man, I'll vote for this, but I have a feeling residents will be in here complaining that we're doing this in their front yard. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Najarian.
Thank you. I don't know too much about community gardens. I guess just like a kibbutz, a Glendale kibbutz, smaller scale.
Something Chavez or Castro would.
Yes, it's collectivist in nature. We'll have to...
Councilman Najarian, I don't know that I would go so far as to say that. It certainly represents a communal effort to provide gardening for people who live in apartments and condos. That'd probably be as far as I would
Do they
go to respond to that.
share the produce, or is it what you grow, you keep what you grow? Type of thing. I mean, anyone can
It's
come in and
intended for,
harvest, right?
yes, and it's for your personal and your family use. Typically, in community gardens, the gardeners actually do share amongst each other.
They swap
They swap
tomatoes for
potatoes, yeah, or potatoes.
My other experience with the community garden is what I remember seeing perhaps a year and a half, 2 years ago in Los Angeles. Was that a community garden that was, it was given to the community, it was being used, the residents obviously felt a deep connection to the land, a buy-in, and then when the use was proposed to be changed and to end it, there were, Daryl Hannah up in the tree chaining herself. Was that part of the LA Community Garden Council's work, or
That was not one of
private?
their projects.
Do you ever envision a situation like that? I mean, realizing that people, after they've grown several crops, really become attached. If for ever chance we need to, let's say, not even close it, but realign the plots or ask someone to leave, do we have the enforcement process to administer this entire garden?
Councilmember Najarian, members of City Council, members of the Housing Authority, yes, we do, and we anticipated that. The Coalition for Green Glendale has set up a set of bylaws for this community garden. The best-run community gardens become self-governing, and they oversee themselves. Obviously, we're a part of this, but they all have what, for lack of a better term, lease agreements to the individual gardeners that are annual and have to be renewed annually. That is the significant part that was missing with Los Angeles. And honestly, that's what's missing at our other community gardens at this point. And we're proposing at this one to start out from scratch. And this group came up with all of that. They researched some of the better-run community gardens in Southern California and actually came up with some of the best practices. And one of the primary ones, so we as a community would not end up in the same situation that Los Angeles ended up with a private piece of property, in that we have the ability to notify gardeners at the end of this growing season, your use of your little 6 by 20-foot plot is terminated.
Do we have the procedure?
And that's actually referenced in the lease agreement that you have with LA Community Garden Council as well.
Do we have the process recorded or in effect that we could enforce a organic gardening
Yes.
process, so no one can just get there with the Durban and what are you doing, and I'm spraying my bugs? I mean, to make sure that
That's in the bylaws.
sustainable. I mean, we're being green here. Obviously, the whole point is to be green. Can we go that extra yard to make sure it's quote-unquote organic?
And Councilman Najarian, members of the City Council and the Housing Authority, I'm speaking on behalf of the Coalition for Green Glendale at this point, because these are all of the things that they have worked on, and one of the provisions of the bylaws is that this particular garden would be organic. You sign that whenever you come in, and then you have the ability to enforce that and actually withdraw somebody from the garden if they violate that and actually terminate their use agreement for their little 6 by 20 plot of land.
My next comment is, I don't know if Mr. Yusefian is right. I haven't heard anybody agree with him on his representations about ownership of that other piece of property or the size of it. But if in fact that other property is larger, I'd like to give them a larger piece of land as their initial plot, which is even more amenable to dividing into parcels than that crazy hatchet, panhandle shape that we have. I don't know if that will screw up their implementation plan. Hopefully not too badly. Nothing has been invested yet, other than approving the process from our end. So I'd like to...
Mr. City Manager, do you have an answer specifically to that question?
As I recall, in the original packet that came in, that was one of the alternate sites that
Right.
that there was a picture of. So
Was or was not?
there was. It was one of the alternate sites. I was wondering what was the rationale for focusing on this
I believe
one
we
as opposed
do
to the
know.
first one.
Let me ask Madeline, Ms. Blake, if you could.
Yeah, the property is 6,500 square feet, so it's about 500 square feet larger than the other site.
But it's rectangular,
Right.
as opposed to losing that whole frontage along Monterey. I mean, would there be more plots available on that other...
Again, we might just turn to the group, and, I mean,
Yeah.
again, I saw it in the original portfolio. It might be interesting to get their take on what their view was of the two sites.
Mr. Engel, I do plan to bring them up in a minute anyway, so...
Well, then I won't belabor that issue, but that's just a point that, if so, I would rather them have a larger spot. The next point is, what an appropriate way to roll into our discussion of use variances. The use variances obviously come in all shapes and sizes and perhaps encompass unknown uses, and the important thing is that we maintain the flexibility to permit different uses, ingenious uses for this type of land.
Thank you, Mr. Najarian.
I just have a
Ms.
question. Every qualified gardener will get the lot for 5 years?
Members of the Housing Authority, members of the City Council, it's a one-year term.
1 year.
For the reasons that Mr. Najarian talked about, that if there were some need to put that land back into another use, which, as our Public Works Department has indicated to us, there's no plan at this point, but if you do, you don't end up with that long-term attachment to that, and it also allows you to shift garden plots around if you need to do that, and you don't end up with the attachment to this particular plot, or to one particular plot. Mr. Parazian, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Parazian. Mr. Quintero.
To Mr. Najarian's question, my experience years ago was that the gardeners themselves came from all backgrounds and ages. I remember a couple of teenage boys that used to go with their grandmother, and of course there were middle-aged people and from all over the world. Some had sort of been farmers in the past, and others were office workers. And so anyway, we had a very mixed bag of people that had that one interest, and everyone got along. I just don't remember any issues.
Okay, Mr. Weaver.
Again, maybe I missed this when I was in the back, Sam. How do you pick the 20 to 40 farmers? Lottery or what?
Councilmember Weaver, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority, as Mr. Yusefian indicated, there are 2 community gardens currently operating, one at Verdugo Park, one at Palmer Park. There are informal waiting lists at both of those right now. We intend to utilize those waiting lists I'm speaking for the group.
Oh, we don't have anything to do with it.
It's self-run. That's the purpose of going with
and forget
LA
my
Community
question.
Garden Council
Right.
and their local operator.
That's my question. As long as people aren't coming to us.
No, they will not.
Thank-
And we send them to the contracted operator.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Why don't we bring up first the 4 folks who are with Coalition for a Green Glendale, and also the gentleman from Los Angeles Community Garden Council. If you wouldn't mind coming up and at least introducing yourselves to the council and the Housing Authority.
Nothing else, it's a good-looking group.
And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and explain which group you're with, because not everyone up here knows all of you.
My name is Glenn Dake. I'm Secretary of the Board of Directors of the Los Angeles Community Garden Council, a California nonprofit corporation. We're the lessor.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Garen Nadir. I'm the co-founder of the Coalition for a Green Glendale.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Anna Kshatri, and I'm also a co-founder of the Coalition.
Hi, my name is Alec Barchosov, and I'm also one of the co-founders for the Coalition.
I'm Guillaume Lemoine, a new member.
Okay, let me ask, and I'd like to hear from the gentleman from Los Angeles Community Garden Council, but also I'd like one of you to respond as well from Coalition for Green Glendale. With regard to the Monterey property, this Monterey property here, we've also talked about a property at Monterey and Coronado. It's not one of our agendized items, so we're limited as to how far we can get into that. But with regard to this particular property, there's been the concern raised that it is not a good site for a community garden for several reasons that were raised. Traffic is one, not just traffic in terms of safety, but also traffic in terms of interfering with the garden itself or the pollution. Also, the parking issues, potential parking issues related to it. Can you address that and why you think this would work or not work?
Yeah, thank you. I can say in a general manner, my experience in the county of LA with similarly situated parcels, the Solano Canyon Community Garden abuts on one side the 110 freeway, and in just south of Elysian Park, north of downtown Los Angeles. It has a very poor parking situation, and it has accommodation for about 50 families. And when you first go there, you do feel the presence of the freeway. And we advise the gardeners that the presence of the stuff in the air that comes from the freeway requires that they wash their produce. But the gardeners are very happy to be there. And the diversity of gardeners that some of the council members observed results in a diversity of transportation modes. They have not had a large number of parking problems, even though their number of gardeners is greater than you're contemplating. So I think it would impact the quality of the garden, but it would not prevent you from having a successful garden on this site, based on my experience.
Okay, and Mr. Lemoine or one of the others, would you care to address that also?
Sure. We've definitely discussed the parking issue as well, and we are aiming to attract people close to the garden, and so far when we receive interest forms, and we do actually have over 20 already interested gardeners, just kind of typing their address into Google Maps, most people are under a mile away, so they are within walking distance. There are a few people that are a little further away, but we're hoping to get mostly people from nearby, and if it's between the two gardens on Monterey, I suppose it doesn't make too big of a difference. I mean, we don't really care so much. We just kind of want to go do it. But location-wise, is not that big of a concern, especially if it's between just the two on Monterey. I don't see a huge difference. And
let me ask you one other question, and that is, how close is this site, if any of you know, to R.D. White Elementary School?
Exact?
No, not exact. Just is it?
On the other
As I can't visualize it from
less
this.
than a mile, or
The other
at
side of
most
the-
a mile.
Other side of the freeway.
Less than a mile, definitely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And Wilson is even closer. Wilson Middle School.
All right. Thank you very much. There may be other questions for you, but I want to yammer a little bit. So don't go far. First of all, I want to thank the Coalition for Green Glendale for bringing this forward. I'm not sure where the notion came from that this is a first for the city of Glendale. It's not. But it is a first for Glendale with this kind of presentation, which is, A, for example, organic, B, looking to do sustainable gardening technique demonstrations and so on, and C, to be used as a template for other properties. One of the reasons, and I'm very glad that my colleague, Councilmember Yusefian, took the trouble to round up some photographs from the two gardens that exist currently in two of our parks. One is Palmer Park and the other is Verdugo Park. One of the problems with those types of community gardens is that they are segregated away. They are not out in readily accessible areas for the public. In fact, at least one of those gardens, you wouldn't even find it if you didn't know it was there. You have to go hunting for it to find it. Because they are secluded and because they are away from public access, and because people don't regularly walk in, they have to drive there, park, because it's not in the middle of a community, they are not as viable in terms of community gardens. And so Mr. Yusefian is quite right when he identifies that, some of the problems attendant to it, and some of the very problems we're trying to overcome by citing a community garden in a neighborhood. I also want to thank the staff for working on this. This is one of those unique opportunities also which makes this a first, where I think our staff learned as much, if not more, from the two organizations than they from us. And I think that is going to serve us well moving forward in order to deal with some of these issues, such as Palmer Park and Verdugo Park, to make them more viable locations. Lastly, using this as a template, finally, to get a sort of city-sponsored, or actually not city-owned, but the city providing some leadership on this. This is really pleasing, and I'm glad that my colleagues on both the Housing Authority and the City Council have asked staff to move forward on this. My feeling is that if the people involved believe that the Monterey site is a viable site, I'm inclined to support it. However, I do agree with Councilmember Yusefian that, well, there's several things he said I agree with, one of which is the fact that the site...
I want a copy of that tape also, although he does agree with me.
See, it'll be in your stocking this year.
Thank you.
The site on Monterey and Coronado, the other site that he was referring to, was sort of not... I don't know why that wasn't brought forward more forcefully in the beginning, but regardless, to me it makes a great second site. So I'm inclined to go forward with this as a trial, and only as a trial. I mention the word trial only because of the difficulties that I see with the site. But I'm also, I know the 110 freeway is hardly a untraveled byway. It's a pretty heavily traveled freeway, and I think if it works there, we can probably make it work here. And my last question is, so how long do you think it'll be before the State of California Ag Department certifies some section of this so they can start selling in one of our farmers markets in Glendale? Because that's a possibility, too. Anyway, yes, sir.
I haven't had a chance to...
I'm sorry, Don. You're going to have it right now, by gosh.
First of all, I wholeheartedly support the idea. But since we can't talk... Scott, since we can't talk about this other property at this point, right?
In any specifics, that's correct. Just in general, in terms of
can't you
noting
accept the concept and check this other property first? Why have a temporary thing? Why not have it where you can really build it and continue it?
If I don't know if that was rhetorical or if you're asking me a question. My answer is I don't view it as a temporary site at this point. I view it as a first site, and I would view the second site, if it turns out to be what we think it is, something that is usable, I would view it as a second site.
That's not what I was thinking. I'm not against it. Not what I was thinking.
Right. I mean, that's my answer, folks.
Mayor?
Mr. Yusefian.
I would like to ask a question from the person who is the leaseor.
That would be from the Los Angeles Community Garden Council.
The coalition, I'm assuming, is not a 501c3, but you guys are?
We are.
Okay. You're leasee. We're the leaseor. Sorry.
I'm sorry, that's my mistake.
If we were, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'm thinking accept this as a concept, continue this matter to next week, and have staff come back with your lease that's already ready in here, just change the address. Would that be a problem for you? It's a larger site, it's rectangular, you don't have to deal with all the little unusable spaces, and it's about 300 feet west and on the other side, in the middle of the block, with a house on each side, which looks very, very much like the picture in here.
Yeah.
Very handsome.
Council member, as a matter of business, we would be agnostic about the two sites. It would be to the Green Glendale Coalition to make the choice as to which of their preferences.
Okay, so 1 week is not going to make a major difference for you? Okay, thank you. And the question to City Attorney, could this come back next week with a different address?
Oh, yes.
And be approved?
As long as it's properly posted, absolutely.
Okay.
And we'll also look into the issue, by the way, of the use variances. The issue of first impression doesn't appear, and talking to Mr. Garcia and looking at the code, it does not appear that it would need a use variance. Possibly it's permitted, at worst, possibly a CUP. So, but we're going to be working with planning on some of the legislative history and legislative intent.
We may need a conditional use permit?
Potentially, and that's why we'll take a look at it.
Okay. Okay, and that would be something that I think we should do. I think the other site, the chances that we would actually use that site somewhere down the line for any traffic issues is going to be a lot less than a piece of parcel that is right next to a freeway entrance and exit. And in case if we ever decide to make that freeway entrance and exit a little bit wider or whatever, I think this will be affected. The other site will not be affected. I think I feel comfortable to even do that for a longer period of time and not have to worry about it.
Sam, may I ask, how long have we had that property, this site?
My understanding, Mayor Draymond, members of the Council and the Housing Authority, that the 134 freeway opened in 1978, this stretch.
Right.
That was a remnant of parcels that went up for sale. It was bought by a succession of private landowners, Mr. Ganji being the most recent. We purchased it
1990.
I was going to say 15 years ago. To widen the on-ramp.
So it's been there about 30 years, basically.
Yeah, it's been there 30 years, and we've actually owned it in its present condition since 1990. It's what it's looked like since.
Right. And when are we going to, Suzanne is not here, but at one point they were drawing and design and money was appropriated to deal with Portola and some of those places and put medians and so on and so forth and improve this intersection. And that was 10 years ago. And you don't know about it, you can't answer it because Mr. Zern or John was not here.
Well, let me ask the city manager whether he has any recollection in the last 10 years.
Again, that precedes me. I haven't seen that design.
Yeah.
I will say the other site was a conversation about very long-term transportation opportunities, such as a connection with Glen Oaks Boulevard. But
Right.
that was looked at as very, very long-term. I'm not aware of what of the other improvements you've mentioned.
All right. Yes, Mr. Engel.
We did look at both sites in terms of parking to address an issue raised by Councilmember Yusefian and Councilmember Weaver. In fact, there is more on-street parking for this site than there is for the other site because of Balboa. Balboa is, if you go right below the F, right down there on that side, Balboa Street actually has a cul-de-sac, cul-de-sac next to the
All
freeway.
those neighbors will be coming down in here complaining.
Actually, we've talked to all of the neighbors on
They're
Balboa,
fine?
and they are saying it's about time.
Really?
Yes, that they have they've had more problems with that lot being empty and access into their rear yards than they think would be caused by having gardeners in it. That's their view of it right now. And remember, they've lived next to that vacant lot for 30 years. We've also talked to the residents across the street from this particular parcel, because this is the one we focused on. We didn't look at the other one. And we had the same reaction from the residents on the other side of Monterey, saying they would appreciate something being done with this particular piece of property. We did not look at because we weren't looking at this, all we did was count the on-street parking between the two lots, and there's more closer to this lot than the other lot. That's all.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, that's what concerns me. That other property is more attractive from the gardener's perspective because it's more quiet and I think just a better place to be. However, I think there'll be more of an impact on the surrounding neighborhoods than here at this corner. I mean, this corner is just a dead zone. And so if I were a neighbor, I agree with you that brief survey you took, I agree that they probably feel a lot more comfortable with the usage like this than the current empty lot. So I think we should just go ahead with this corner lot and then see what comes up next. But look, I'm also very interested in doing something in the southern portion of the city. I mean, we've got one here, so to me, the next choice really should be where the bulk of the multifamily residences are. Although, if you walk down Monterey Road and turn left, you're basically going to hit numerous multifamily neighborhoods. So I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of people that are going to be from outside the neighborhood. But I'm prepared to move 1A.
I'll second it. Let's try it on for size.
All right. Is there further discussion on this particular motion? Mr. Yusefian.
I would ask my colleagues to vote for a continuance and go to the other site. I think it would be a lot better long-term. Also, that site is closer to the multifamily, and you could actually walk easier and safer to that area. And I agree with Mr. Quintero. It is much quieter and more serene location than right next to the freeway. Now, I understand the people right behind them, they want something there because they don't want the taggers or so on and so forth. There's other opportunities. Maybe we could do something of a different, garden type of a thing that is, more of, demonstrative type of a thing. But, I seem to think that the other site is going to be there for a lot longer. To me, there's something in me tells me this is just the wrong site. Idea's good, it's just the wrong site. And when I have one 300 feet, just a little bit west of it, just sits there, and I'm going, why not there? It's larger, it's rectangular, more standard, easier to draw. I drove the site, both sites today. So.
Thank you, Mr. Yusefian. I have to ask, I'm going to see if there's any other discussion, but I have to ask the attorney. We've had a motion, a second, and a request for continuance, all in one, I would say, 30-second time slot.
I have not heard that raised as a substitute motion.
Right.
Okay.
I heard it raised as a request for the colleagues.
I'll put it to sleep. I'll make that as a substitute motion. Let's see if we get a second.
To continue
this to next week, to come back, modified a contract to just put the new address there for the other site. That's my substitute motion.
That's the motion. Is there a second? Oh, excuse me. Yes, sir.
I was going to say it dies for lack of a second. I haven't heard a second.
Let's see if there is a second.
I'll second it for discussion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second.
Can we do both?
Priority. Substitute motion takes priority.
Mr. Weaver.
I think we should start with that one. If that's successful, you could come down here later.
I'm not going to vote for a substitute site. I said try this on for size. Staff has done work. They've worked with the group. We don't know all the details. We can always move it. It may be a second site, depending on how this works. So I'll go with what staff's recommended for now. We'll find out very shortly. After it's in from the neighbors and the growers and whatever. We got a success, then the other one will surely work.
All right, Laura, anything?
Yeah.
No, do you have any comments?
I have no any comments.
Mr. Quintero?
Other than that.
Mr. Major?
I guess when I said both, what I meant is give them both sites and ask them to do the first one at the rectangular site, and then when they're ready, they're pre-approved to come down for this flag lot.
The problem is we don't have that second site on the agenda.
Oh.
And for you, and so
that's why
Councilor Yusefian's motion is properly in order because we can't approve the second site that's not on the agenda.
I move the question.
Well, let me see if there's any other discussion. No. I'm not going to make that mistake twice, so I'm going to miss you twice.
So I guess we take a roll on the substitute, and if it dies, then it goes.
Yeah, so we'll take Mr. Kosaki, and we have no other speakers and no other discussion. Let's hear the roll call on the substitute motion.
Council members Najarian?
This is the motion to continue.
Yes.
Next week.
Yes.
Quintero? No. Weaver?
No.
Yusefian?
Aye.
Mayor Draymond?
No.
Move one as,
It's already been moved.
well, that's right.
So we have a
now on the
motion
table.
and a second on item 1A. Is there further discussion on that
That's so
item?
long.
All right, Mr. Kasaki.
Council members Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Yusefian.
No.
Mayor Draymond.
Yes. I would like to ask, however, that we do bring this secondary site back, as Councilmember Najarian and Council members Najarian and Yusefian have suggested, in terms of finding out the details on its viability. We think we know. Let's find out for sure. And it may be that it might be a good second site.
Mayor Draymond, members of the council and the Housing Authority, I do have one piece of information I can add since that time while you were discussing this.
Mr. Engel, did you bury the lead on us? Is that...
I did find out one question to that, and that was Mr. Najarian's question about both. I checked with LA Community Garden Council, and they would be interested in entertaining a second lease as well for that property if you decide to proceed with that.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Kasaki, could we hear the item at 2A, please?
The 2 is Director of Community Development and Housing regarding proposed affordable home ownership project Durang Gardens to be located at 339 through 343 and 331 through 335 West Durand Street. At 2A is council resolution authorizing the submittal of an application to the California State Department of Housing and Community Development for funding under the BEGIN program and execution of all related documents in connection therewith.
Councilmember Weaver.
I'd like to move 2A.
All right. There's a motion and a second. Does council or Housing Authority request any further input on this? Mr. Najarian.
I just want everyone to know what we're doing here. We're applying for a grant which is going to permit home ownership of up to, 40 out of the 70 units?
57.
57?
That's what
out
this
of the-
grant does. It
out of the
allows
70
57
units.
to be affordable, correct?
So the authority, in conjunction with the city, continues our efforts at providing affordable housing to the community, and this is an ownership of property project as opposed to just rental. So 70 lucky families will be able to have their own.
That's
Mr. Chair,
5.7 million.
members of the Housing Authority, there will be 60 units altogether. 3 are single-family homes that will be sold at market. The remaining 57 will be affordable to moderate-income, first-time home buyers.
Thank you, Mr. Najarian, for that clarification. All right.
And the grant is for $57 million, correct? I mean, 5.7 million.
That's correct.
Yeah. I just put another...
Oh, well.
It's only a
We'll
zero,
take
right?
All right. We have no further discussion. I have no speaker cards on this topic, so
We had a motion.
Mr. Kasakian, if you would.
Council members Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Yusefian.
Aye.
Mayor Draymond.
Yes. Let's go to the next item, please.
At 3 is Director of Community Development and Housing regarding past actions and discussions regarding rent control, mediation, and rental housing issues. At 3 is council motion to note and file report and provide direction to staff. And at 3B is authority motion to note and file report.
Very good. Thank you so much. And who will we be going to? Well, I'm getting pointed. They're pointing at each other, so I'm not sure. I'll tell you what, just to make this interesting, I'll go to Madeline Blake, who may toss it to someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council and the Housing Authority. As requested, the city attorney and I have prepared, I think, 11 documents which basically document the history of discussions of rents, rent stabilization, rent mediation, the rental housing committee, the just cause eviction ordinance, and all of the past reports and proposed ordinance, some were passed and some weren't, were prepared for your information. It started in January 2001, and for 3 years, the City Council and Housing Authority discussed these issues, and everything is here, and we are prepared to follow any direction that you have. I don't know if Mr. Howard has anything to add.
Okay. Mr. Howard, do you have anything to add?
No, sir. I think really Ms. Blake covered it all. It was really an intent to provide you with the historical background of the reports that the City Council and its predecessor City Councils have seen and discussed and provided direction. The one piece of legislation is our Just Cause Eviction Ordinance, which has been amended twice, based upon the recommendations of a Rental Housing Issues Working Committee. We've included in the report as well both statutes and case law that bear on these issues since 2002-2003. And again, you can see it's the very summary format. Should you like any more details, we're prepared to provide that to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howard. A couple of housekeeping issues before we get into some discussion here. For one thing, we have speaker cards. Mr. Howard, item 3A is the council item. For the public who may be keeping score here. All right, and item B is the Housing Authority motion.
That is correct, and that is...
All right. The other housekeeping issue is simply one that I hate to do this to you, Mr. Allen, but I do need a clarification. Did you mean to speak on only 3B, or? Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. All right. All right. Do I have any comments, questions, or input or discussion from my colleagues before we go to the public? Mr. Yusefian.
Mr. Mayor, as Chair of Housing, I asked this item to be put on the agenda since one of my colleagues had asked to discuss the issue of mediation. And I think three of us were on the council at the time that this hefty document that's in front of us had been discussed since 2001. So 2001, 2002, 2003 was discussed. As you could see in the documents, there are actually two ordinances relating to mediation, and so the issue of mediation was also discussed, and the shape and form that it was taking in place. I think it's interesting as I went through this, it kind of brought back some of my memories a little bit more vividly, that what my remembering of issues are. I have a pretty good memory on those. Nevertheless, I didn't remember it took 3 years, but time kind of flies. But there are people who sometimes think that this council has never tried to tackle very difficult issues, and we've kind of shied away from them. And there are new people who come to this city, they think that we have never discussed these issues. And I just want that, so this was very good to put on the agenda so the public knows, once again, this council or previous council had dealt with this, tackled with this for at least 3 years. And it also provided all the necessary documentation for two of my colleagues who were not there on those wonderful 3 years. So that was part of the reason that I put this on. And if there's any other good ideas any of my colleagues have, I'm always open to hearing good ideas, opportunities.
Mr. Yusefian, actually, you mentioned something at the very top of your comments that, if I may, I would like, because I have received a few emails asking this question as to how we got here with this discussion. I don't mean with the topic, but exactly how we got here with this topic as a joint meeting in the afternoon versus a council meeting at night. And there's even been the suggestion that there's some conspiracy up here to put it in the afternoon to hide it, secret it away. Somehow you all found out about it. So it wasn't a very good conspiracy, I suppose. But just to remind you, Councilmember Najarian actually raised it initially during an evening meeting. Councilmember Yusefian, as chair of the Housing Authority, raised it to be placed on the agenda in the afternoon Housing Authority meeting.
Correct.
The reason it ended up as a joint meeting is because if we are to act on it, as I understand it, the Housing Authority by itself wouldn't necessarily have the authority to change a city ordinance like this. So that is why it includes the council as well. So, since it is a housing authority item as well, it falls to the afternoon meeting. That was essentially it.
And I should also point out historically, just actually making reference to the first exhibit, September 4th, 2001, was a joint report to the City Council and Housing Authority. Most of the reports, other than, as you point out, Mr. Mayor, the reports relating to direction on legislation were joint meetings.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Let me go to my colleagues. I'll start with Mr.
I'd
Minzer.
rather wait for the comments.
All right. Mr. Yusefian, anything else?
Let's hear from the public.
Mr. Najarian? Mr. Quintero? Mr. Perez? Very good. We'll go to the public. Our first, 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Mike Mohill, followed by Harvey Pearson.
Evening, gentlemen, Mayor. We make choices in life as to what we do with our future, be it in high school or in college. Should I study for my exams, or should I go out to the Americana and play and go to a movie? But we make choices to study, some of us, to go to school, to work hard, do the American thing, save our money, and then we buy a house. We also choose in America where we want to live. We can live in Glendale, New York City, Compton, Sunland, Chicago, wherever. We make those choices. This is a country of free to choose. Government does not tell you have to live in Glendale, Burbank, Sunland. We choose to live in Glendale for many reasons. Again, this is our choice. Nobody twisted my arm to move to Glendale. I chose it because I liked the mountains. I asked my wife, at 31 years ago, where do you want to live? In the mountains where I was raised, in Glendale, or the beach? She said, I love seeing those trees. I said, okay, let's look up in the Woodlands area, or Glen Oaks Canyon, which we did. We spent 3-4 years looking, saving our money, and finally came and put down a down payment. Nobody came around and said, Mr. Mohill, we're going to give you a free loan. We're going to give you money so you can have a down payment. We're going to help you with a bailout. I worked damn hard for my money. I was a salesman for 27 years. I know what rejection is all about. I heard it for 27 years. No, Mr. Mohill, we like you very much, but we're not going to buy your product. So rent control hits home. Yes, it's tough to live in Glendale, but no one said you have to live in Glendale. You can live in Compton, Burbank, even Beverly Hills. In fact, if you want to live in Santa Monica, they do have rent control there. And if you look at some of the apartment buildings there, they're falling apart. Because the landlord don't want to put any more money into it. And if we go down the slippery road of having rent control, we'll end up someday looking like Santa Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohill. Harvey Pearson, followed by Rita Unikian.
Harvey Pearson, City Council, Mayor. I live in an apartment building in Los Feliz, and I guess you could say one reason I haven't moved lock, stock, and barrel into Glendale, where my significant other friends and et cetera are, is my rent would go way up. I'm speaking on this mainly because the image, which was just addressed by the prior speaker, that if you have rent control, that there goes the maintenance, there goes the quality of the neighborhood, et cetera, because landlords won't want to spend any money. Well, the most recent owner of my apartment building, he bought it. It had been under rent control for some time, and as soon as he came in and took it over, he put in all new copper piping. The old pipes, you'd come in at 2 a.m. in the morning, the month of December, which is coming up, you get cold water for about 10 minutes. The hot water wouldn't come in. He put in all new copper piping through the whole building, and now we get hot water instantly. He did that, knowing it was a rent-controlled building. He's replacing refrigerators as tenants move out. And there was one washer and one dryer, a 20-unit building in the basement when he took over the building. Now there's 2 washers and 2 dryers in the basement. So the neighborhood, the building is not going to the dogs. I assume he's doing it because there's a capital improvement feature in the Los Angeles rent stabilization ordinance, which Los Feliz is obviously under, that allows some of the costs they are putting in the copper piping to be passed along and recapture the cost to the tenants. It's not as good. He's not going to get as much back, no, but it's enough that he did it. And then I presume the other reason would be that the capital value of the property itself would go up, so if he ever wanted to sell it, he'd get a lot more money for having improved it. So it can happen I don't know if you're going to, it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen in Glendale, true, but I have friends that live here. I would hope they don't get priced out of the city as it gets more gentrified for higher income people, whatever, especially in South Glendale. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Our next speaker is Rita Unikian, followed by Herbert Milano.
Hi, dear city members. I appreciate your intention. Intention to discuss rent control or rent stabilization. This economy is very bad. This economy is very bad. The rents are more every day. No one is taking about us. Why should people who work to help America not have any help from the government? During this time when the economy is so bad, every day the government helps banks and people who have money. But people who work hard and pay rent have no help. How many times do I have to say that the economy is bad? Rents are too high. America needs to help the people. I ask you to please help me to pass rent control in Glendale, that for all low-income residents and senior citizens in Glendale who are struggling to make a living can enjoy this city. I have petitioned with thousands of signatures for rent control. We want you to listen to us. I ask the council to put rent control on the ballot, put it on the agenda, then discuss. I care a lot about rent control. I hope that I can reach 13,000 signatures before April so that the council can put rent control on the ballot. And I am sure this will happen because God is with me to help the people who are desperate for rent control. Thank you for your consideration. God bless you. But Mr. Mayor, this is very happy for yesterday, for this newspaper for Glendale, for Think Good for rent control in Glendale for low-income residents and senior citizens. This paper, I'm very proud of this paper because I know it for somebody is Think Good for rent control in Glendale for when its economy is very bad. I hope you read, and I hope everybody is read for Glendale newspaper and little bit help for people in Glendale for, I hope, input in the agenda or signature 13,000 or something like that. But very soon, before April, is rent control in Glendale, same for another place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Unikian. Herbert Milano, followed by Rick Barnes.
Good afternoon, members of the Housing Authority. My name is Herbert Milano. The issue of rent control was discussed, and we took significant action for a period of a good 3 years in trying to resolve issues, including the issues of mediation, and one of the major objectives was to provide the kind of knowledge and instruction to tenants, just like these tenants who are coming before you, with regard to the issue of rent control, because unfortunately, most of the time, most tenants are unaware of the choices available, of the laws of California that are in place that sometimes override or limit the decisions that you can make here, for example, the Ellis Act. But I want to address in the short time that I have a couple of issues. If you look at the history of rents in Glendale, they've gone up on an average about 3 to 3.5% for the last 20, 30 years. If you look at the rents increases in the city of Los Angeles, they've pretty much gone at a rate of about 3 to 3.5% every year. So at the end of the day, there isn't much of a difference with regard to the increase. What happens, though, is whenever you have the type of rent control that you have in Los Angeles, for example, you have a fairly constrained just cause for eviction. That means that if you happen to be a landlord and it discovered that one of your tenants is dealing in drugs, the only way you can evict that tenant is by having your manager or the landlord testify in court and having a witness to say, I have someone who's dealing in drugs. But doing that puts in jeopardy the life and the well-being of the manager or the landlord or the witness. And so what happens is that we are not able to get rid of that tenant because we would be afraid of our own lives. Now, this is no joke. I had 2 buildings in Los Angeles where we began to see the deterioration of the community significantly, precisely because of that. And I would gladly take anyone, and take him to those particular areas where there was a pristine neighborhood that turned into a nightmare. Bars on practically every window, the situation is absolutely terrible. You lose control of your communities. You create a significant amount of crime. One of the things that attracted me to Glendale was this concept about being conservative and safe. We have next to us a city with 3.5 million people, Los Angeles, easily accessible for anyone who wants those protections. But you also have to live with the consequences that it brings. Rent control primarily hits hard those individuals who've kept the rents low. Professional building managers maintain the rents at current rents, so going at 3.5 or 3% per year makes really not much of a difference. But those landlords who kept the rents low, they are the ones who are hit. The mom and pop landlords who they allow individuals with low income to afford Glendale, they are the ones who are then punished. Think about it hard. We have to instruct and provide education to a lot of individuals who are truly unaware of the impacts that rent control have on a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Rick Barnes, followed by Barry Allen.
Okay. Good afternoon, Housing Authority, Redevelopment Agency, City Council. It's the first time in the afternoon to speak with you guys, but my name is Rick Barnes. I am a multi-property owner here in the city. I have a vested interest in your decision that you make on this. I want to make it clear that I am involved in a lot of different community organizations. I am not here representing any of those individuals or community organizations. I'm here just as a fact that I'm a property owner. I did property management in the city of Los Angeles, and I learned a lot of lessons about rent control. And I also am a very fair property manager, property owner. The only grip I have is when I rent to a tenant, is to do very strong due diligence on what is that tenant, what do they look like, how are they going to be, and financially, how do I work with them. In the city of Glendale, with the justified eviction program, it has created a great deal of problems because just like Mr. Milano just said, you have to have some witnesses. And again, one of the programs I was originally and started here in the city, and the reason it was close to my heart was because in the city of Los Angeles, the only way to protect your tenants was you had to get in your car, drive to the property, and see the individuals that were attacking your building, and you had to take ownership. The government didn't show up, the police didn't show up, and we're not going to get police protection here in Glendale with our shortages in our budget. I can guarantee that you have to take ownership, and you have to be your own witness. So how do you do it on justified evictions? It's very difficult in our community right now. And the other part is that when you have rent control, we're always the ones holding the bucket. When it comes down to going through the courts, it can be 4 months before you get a tenant out. We just had 2 where I helped some property owners, where after we got the notice to take possession. It took the sheriff's department 45 days to show up to evict that tenant while they were doing damage to the individual property. That's why I don't like rent control on one hand. The other hand is that it brings you, the government, back into my property. How many other businesses do we have where you are looking at our business? And as a mom-and-pop operation, we already have a lot that we have to deal with. I want to bring one other thing up, is that as early Americans, we just celebrated Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving has a lot of different notes to it, but one was the success of what became capitalism and free property ownership. Fee title that was given to these individuals that came over, and they developed their land and brought forth richness and goodness. Because of that, there was a celebration with the American Indians. Not because the American Indians saved us, it was because there was a thing that happened that never happened before, where land was divided and given to these individuals. So with that, I sure hope you vote no again on this. Let them go get their $13,000 and let's take it to a city vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barnes. Our next speaker is Barry Allen, followed by Laura Alesso.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Chair of the Housing Authority and the City Council. I'm Barry Allen. I'm neither taking a position for or against rent control. The issue that I would like to address is as to which of the people on this dais own property for rental, and how many of those I do believe Mr. Nigerian who represents ownership of rental properties, and I don't know of any of the others. I don't know if Mr. Quintero says no, and I don't know about Mr. Weaver, and Mr. Yusefian says no, and I assume Mr.
That's okay, you can say it, you can assume that it's true.
Okay, so the only one on this dais who has rental properties is Mr. Nigerian, am I correct? Can't respond, I understand.
I do, I can't speak for...
The others did, they already spoke. Each spoke except for Mr. Weaver. So I just wanted to know that in case there are votes and there may be a potential conflict of interest of having an interest in a rental property. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Let me address that.
Do you mind if we finish hearing our other two speakers and then we can address all the...
You sort of laid a taint on me at this point.
Mr. Najarian, you are not tainted. I will defend your untaintedness, and let us just push on because of the hour, and then we'll come back and give you a chance to detaint yourself.
Opposite of untainted pure is... Hi, I'm Laura Alasso. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Glendale Association of Realtors. First, we want to thank you all currently seated and your predecessors for all the hours you have spent on this issue. As I read the staff report, rent control was really not on the table, and I really wasn't going to remind you of why rent control doesn't work, but I did want to read from you a study. As much as we all have sympathy for a low-income tenant who has a rent that they are struggling to meet, that rent control doesn't really help those tenants. And the studies in Berkeley and Santa Monica showed that rent control, and I will quote, predominantly white, well-educated, young, professionally employed, and affluent were the benefactors, substantially increasing the disposable income of such tenants while exacerbating the problems of low-income tenants. So the very problem that you would be trying to solve with rent control is actually made worse with rent control. One of the other items that you were talking about was mediation. I am told by many of our members that rents in this community as well as throughout the Southland are actually coming down. Certainly, just as the cost of a home is coming down, rents are as well. This is certainly a perfect example of the free market economy and an example of the symbiotic relationship between a tenant and a landlord. They need each other. In a down market, the landlord needs those tenants as much as the tenant needs a place to live. So those landlords are not going to be raising the rents so that they drive out their tenants, because they need the tenants to be able to support their lifestyle and and their retirement in many cases as well. So we look at this and as we hope that you do, that it's not really broken, and you ought to leave it alone. And we appreciate again that you've brought the subject up, but we are hoping that the things that you have put into place already, leave them alone, and let's move on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Okay, Armin Avedian, followed by Auntie Trinidad.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council and City staff, my name is Armin Avedian. I'm the current president of the Glendale Association of Realtors, and I represent approximately 1,700 Realtor members and about 200 MLS members who work and live primarily in the city of Glendale. My position as a Realtor, also I would like to express my position as a homeowner, as a rental unit owner, and also as someone whose mother and whose mother-in-law both live in rental units, not owned by me. So I think I have a very clear view of what is going on. Through over 20 years of working in real estate and seeing both sides of the coin, I believe we have to believe in the capitalistic system. We live in America where the forces of economy, the supply and the demand, they determine price. If a landlord takes a one-bedroom apartment and prices it $3,000, nobody will rent it. He will reduce and reduce and reduce until it comes down to the $800, $900, or $1,000 price, at which point it will rent. Nobody ever objects when somebody buys a house, $600,000. Nobody ever says to the buyer, or the buyer doesn't turn around and say to the seller that you sold it too high to me. Well, you didn't have to buy. Same thing with a rental. You do not have to rent. As far as investments, City of Glendale is considered to be an excellent investment location for investors throughout the country. Come and invest in Glendale, specifically because it does not have rent control. That is why an apartment building, an investor would pay higher in City of Glendale than in the City of Los Angeles, just because of that reason. The rents could even be the same. He will still pay more in Glendale than in any other city. Essentially, I mean, it's a cliche, but if it ain't broke, please don't fix it. I would not, I would oppose any kind of mediation, arbitration, or anything else, which I believe for certain people, it's just a backdoor into eventually achieving rent controls. Rent control can only, people have talked about it, and it is absolutely a fact. If we had rent control in Glendale, it really would promote landlords. It would give the landlords an excuse not to repair the buildings. If there's rent control, I'll say, I'm sorry, I cannot raise your rent. Cost of construction has gone up. Everything has gone up. I cannot, make the necessary improvements. Wholeheartedly, as someone who's connected to the industry, on the tenant side and the landlord side, I completely oppose, and my membership of 1,700 agents, we oppose any form of rent control. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Avedian. Auntie Trinidad?
Good evening, gentlemen. First of all, I want to commend the Housing Authority for its willingness to and open-mindedness in addressing the issue. My concern, though, is how much time and energy are we going to spend on the issue when, in fact, and this is rebuttable, when in fact there hasn't been any material or demonstrable change in the condition in the city and in terms of the nature or magnitude of the problem. I don't know how many people are complaining about the necessity and the viability of rent control. What triggers the discussion again? Are people being gouged? Are they being charged more rent than the property is worth because of having been because of being an existing tenant and that they cannot move because of the related cost to moving. And so unless there's been a change in the nature and scope of the problem, I think this has been discussed extensively. There are, I think, certain defensible altruisms, which is private sector is the primary and efficient provider of housing, not the public sector. And property owners are best able to maintain proper and regulate proper condition and use of property, not the public sector. There are also certain correlations and causality that, and I recognize the gentleman's experience, that there are certain benevolent landlords who are willing and able to do the certain improvements because they want to and they can afford to. But for everyone that is able to do that and willing to do that, there are probably 20 people who are willing to do that but are unable because of financial and economic realities. If there are also certain, if we can maintain, or property owners can't maintain a top condition, or there's no incentive for doing that, okay, you generally end up with poor condition, poorer quality of tenant, poorer neighborhood, and pretty soon you're going to be talking about reduced property valuation, which will spill over to residential area. And that is, I think, has been demonstrated to a great degree by the change in demographics, and I'm not just, I'm talking in broad terms, from Valley, from the Los Angeles, LA downtown, and North Hollywood and Van Nuys, where we had an influx of lower quality tenants, which resulted in more police problem and lower valuation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trinidad. Our last speaker is Brian Malone.
Good evening, Council. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'd like to give a different perspective. I put on my card there, I am a realtor with Dilbeck Realtors here in Glendale, but I'd really like to speak outside of that. I actually live in Burbank. I'm a former owner in Glendale of property, but I live in Burbank. And way before, I've been in the business for over 20 years, but before I was in that business, I had the fortune through my other business and travels to travel throughout the other states, throughout the country, throughout the USA. And so I thought I'd just like to give an outside perspective of, and to state up front that I am an advocate of property rights and totally against any form of rent control. I've seen in so many different states, my parents came here to Glendale, and my grandmother in 1920 came from Deadwood, South Dakota, with my mother and daughters and children, one of 6 sisters, and obtained their property over here on Allen Street. My father and his family came also. They all went to Hoover, and they went to, and lived here in Glendale, and were all raised in the film industry. But in my travels since the 70s and 80s throughout the states, the blight, the depression in the properties that I've seen that rent control has done has really created a lot of problems. So I'm against it in any form. Please keep Glendale first. Don't go down this slippery slope. And I think that would better for all of us. And that symbiotic relationship between the tenant and between the landlord is paramount and working fine now. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, because it is working well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malone. All right, that was our last speaker. Let me go to my colleagues. I'll start on this end. Well, actually, let me see if Ms. Brazian has anything.
Myself, I live in rental housing. When I forced to move because of my doggy, so the owner told me that he'll give me rent for $1,300. I told him no. Would you go down? He told me, if I go down, I won't do anything at your apartment. Whatever is broken, you should fix it. So, but because of doggy, since nobody will giving me apartment for rent for my doggy, so I got to agree with that, and it's okay with me. So I think if there will be rent control, nobody will no landlord will fix whatever is broke. So I don't think the rent control it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Perez.
Do you mean your cat, your dog?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Mr. Weaver.
Well, I've said it so many times, say it again. It's been said, I'm not going to go down the slippery slope going to rent control. You start with mediation, and it'll keep moving. Oppose it all. I think I'll vote for today is to note and file. And I wish this item would quit coming up to the council, at least until you get a new council that maybe favors rent control. So I'm tired of seeing it up here. It's not the first time, it's not the second time. Nobody on this dais says they support rent control. So we want to talk about mediation. I'm not going to go either. I'm not going to go there at all. So very simple. We got to end this. We're wasting our time up here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Quintero.
Well, as was mentioned, we talked about rent control for 3 years and came up with what we thought were some solutions. So that's what's been enacted. And in fact, I do think I see more and more rental signs up. So I think the market is absolutely starting to soften. In addition to that, I think there's going to be much less sales of apartment buildings than they have been in the past, since obviously with the economy down, the property owner is not going to be able to raise the rents. So I think all in all, we're where we should be at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Najarian.
First off, I'd like to address Mr. Allen's issue of my charges of conflict of interest. I do have some rental units in the city, and at the commencement of the discussions, I did obtain a shorthand opinion from the city attorney about whether or not my ownership in that type of real estate presents a conflict, and his answer was absolutely not. Was that correctly paraphrasing your response to me?
Based on the numbers you and I have discussed, the answer is no. And in addition, this is a citywide issue. The agenda item itself isn't about rent control. It's about past discussions you've had. It turns out that the audience wants to focus on that, but that's really not the issue. That's before you. But in any event, the public generally exception would apply. It applies citywide, and there's a 5,000 household threshold. Board surpassed that. So on a number of levels, the answer is no. No conflict.
Thank you. And let me just, Mr. Yusefian gave a little bit of a history of this, and in terms of the question as to why is this on the agenda, why was this even raised? Well, first off, I am opposed to any type of rent control, period. However, for several weeks, months, we were listening to individuals from the community who came up to give us their difficult stories about not just the rents being too high, but the rents being raised dramatically on individuals who are already in the apartments. And even though it might not be, even though every one of us on council may express their opinion that they are against rent control, it still behooves us as representatives of the public to raise this issue, to take the pulse of the community, to receive input from both the realtors, the apartment owners community, as well as the renters. And I think we did. Perhaps there could have been more. I know that whenever I'm out in public, one of my largest issues that is raised to me is that the rents are too high in Glendale. Be that as it may, that's an individual opinion by the particular renter that they're too high. But let's just have a little bit of sensitivity to this. This isn't like one gas station jacking up his price to $6 a gallon of gas. It's easy just to drive by that station and go to another station. Once renters are in their units, it is very difficult. There's a lot of inertia for them to pack up and move. I am sure that 99% of the apartment owners in this community are responsible, are sensitive, are fair. But let's not kid ourselves that there are clearly some out there, and they may be absentee landlords. They may be landlords whose only interest is to grab as much money as they can from their units, who take advantage of the residents. To say that everything's fine and this is a perfect utopia, a perfect balance of supply and demand, that's not where it is. Is it working? Yes, the system is working. Is this the end-all of a system's... well, I think the complaints of those who have given us their horror stories certainly leave an impression on me, and it's not something that I can ignore, even though I'm against rent control. It's something that certainly hits home to me. And let's not get up here and say that, oh, let's not go down that slippery slope, because folks, Mr. Weaver, the other gentleman, we're halfway down that slope. When we passed the just cause eviction, that is half, maybe more than half of what Los Angeles has in their rent control ordinance. Does anybody disagree with that?
Yes.
Well, that is certainly the just cause of evictions that Los Angeles has in their rent control ordinance, is the rent stabilization ordinance. And you cannot, previously, 5 years ago, you could evict a tenant for any reason in Glendale. Anybody arguing with that? No. But we passed that ordinance, we meaning the prior council, and these are the issues that some of you are raising, that you have to have a witness if you want to evict them for damage to your unit. You have to have a witness for selling drugs. We are going down that slope. Clearly, the amount that is being charged is not regulated. But we're down that slope for the types of reasons that you have to evict. Is it a complete rent control? It's not. But I think we're fooling ourselves if we say that we're holding out and we're not going anywhere near anywhere near closer to the type of tenants' rights and tenants' protection that some of the other cities have. That's essentially it. However, I do have a question. 2 weeks ago, Mr. City Attorney, we were presented with some documents which came via the city clerk from Ms. Unikian. Presumably they were handed to her, handled by the city clerk. A notice of intent to circulate rent petition, a request for preparation of battle, title, and summary. Does that constitute the initiation of rent control to be put on the ballot?
One of my staff members has actually reviewed that, and we'll be sending a letter to Ms. Unikian relating to whether it's defective or not.
Oh, what is it?
It's defective.
It is defective. It wasn't signed, or
that doesn't mean they can't cure the defects.
Okay.
They're not difficult to cure.
So I think it's far better for this community and this council to raise this issue and discuss and let our feelings be known and hear from the community, and let those who favor rent control to hear from the real estate community, even if we've discussed this 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago. This is something that I think we need to, as it starts to bubble up to the surface, we can't ignore it. We need to air it out, and that was my intention, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, in raising the issue, to air it out just so everyone knows where everyone stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Najarian. Mr. Yusefian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with my colleague, Mr. Najarian. I think it's at any time, even an old issue, when it comes in a different time, it is our obligation to discuss it. This is good government in action. You need to discuss it because some people forget it. There are also new people to the area that haven't heard it. So it is important for us to do this. I'd like to go very quickly to let you know the times that we discussed this thing. We discussed it in January 2001, September 2001, November 2001, January 2002, February 2002, August 2002, November 2002, January 2003, February 2003, June 2003, November 2003, December 2003, January 2004, February 2004, and March 2004. So this is not one of those items that we just talked about in 2 sessions and we said, okay, we're done, pack it up and leave. There were many ordinances that were introduced, some were passed, some were modified and changed. And so I have one question to ask from, I don't know, anybody from housing or city or the attorney. We did pass a mediation program that was supposed to be run by an organization. I think Mr. Milano was heading it up. As a matter of fact, on February 2002, we passed a motion approving $15,000 for community outreach to do that. Is that group still functional? Is it working or it's not? Because at one point, the previous council approved a mediation, and the documents are here, and the mediation program required $110,000 to be spent to hire 2 people and do that. Then later on, that was rescinded in exchange for Mr. Milano's approach to do this through the Property Owner Association. And then we just gave them $15,000 to kind of do that. I just want to know, currently, is there a mediation program in process, or it just doesn't exist at all anymore?
Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, City Council, no, it does not exist any longer. In August, I think of 2002, Mr. Milano, the program he proposed was predicated on the rental community, the property management and property owner community volunteering to participate in changing their leases with the tenants, and he did not get a lot of voluntary participation from them. What evolved after that was the Rental Housing Committee and their recommendations, but there is no mediation program that exists right now.
Okay. And so basically, it's just not there.
That's correct.
I think that's part of the issue that at hand. There is no such thing as a mediation program. Now, I've read the documents, and I will tell you, the individuals or landlords that create the problem are generally the ones who are just hard-headed, boneheaded, dumb-headed, as you have used in the past. And you're not going to get them to voluntarily do anything. Absolutely nothing. Because if they were going to do anything voluntarily, they would have done the right thing to begin with. So any kind of a mediation program or arbitration program that you want to do voluntarily, it's never going to work. The number of people who do that are very small. The majority of people actually follow the rule that, hey, I don't want to have empty locations. I want to rent it out. They're generally pretty decent. Nevertheless, I think this council, to your question, Mr. Najarian, passed the just cause eviction. It was not an easy task. It took over a year to pass it, several iterations of it, and ultimately it passed. Originally, there was only 3 of us who voted for it. Mr. Weaver and Mr. Gomez didn't vote for it, the original iteration. Then later on, it was modified, and the modified version was passed by 5 council members. And part of the reason that was passed is it wasn't about the money. It was about the mistreatment of the public who lived on those units. The fact that they did not keep up their place. The fact that they threatened them. If they didn't do a certain thing, they would be subject to all kinds of horrendous things that I don't think any human being should have to deal with. The ordinance that is out there has not created a major rift in the fabric of rentals and landlords and tenants. But I think it has given some little, thought process to the landlord who wants to be unreasonable to be a little bit decent about doing things. So that's why we have not heard this huge complaint about just cause eviction not working. we have not seen a tremendous number of people actually using it for that purpose or complaining. We have few, we deal with it, and we goes, and Lucy Varpetian, I think at the city attorney's office, deals with those once in a blue moon. Now, I think that's where we are, and Mr. Najarian had asked if we should do some type of a mediation, and now that you have seen the documents, on the, at least the two different versions, apparently Mr. Milano's technique did not work, and the two different techniques that we had put in there, one of them actually passed by council and then later on was taken back because Mr. Milano had a better and cheaper solution at $15,000 instead of $110,000. Do you feel that those are any of the ways that we should be going, or do you think we should just let it be, and what do you think?
I just don't, I mean, to be honest, if I can answer that directly, in the last few months, I have not had I've not been given notice of the severe situation that I did hear a year ago. And as the economy was booming, and as property values were going up, and perhaps the increases were a result of the new landlords coming in and bringing it up to market, that's when I was hearing it. But I think in the recent downturn in the economy, Mr. Quintero mentioned a lot of for sales, et cetera. I have not heard that. I haven't heard a lot of people coming to council discussing besides Mrs. Unikian. So I guess at this point I don't feel an urgency to get into the mediation issues at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Najarian. Mr. Yusefian, was there anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Yes, sir, Mr. Mincy.
And he was here throughout the whole thing.
Yes, I've been here. I want you to realize that
They built this dais around you.
Right, exactly.
I want you to realize that this is not a flippant thing on the dais. We have really gone deep in this, in an area, in a time when it was really bad, where rents were raised like $200 a month, I know on one occasion. I fortunately didn't have that situation, but in my own, I've been in the same apartment building for 15 years. We've had 4 new owners in the 15 years, and I know that's when my raise, or when my rent is going to go up. But on each occasion, except for one, did not do a good job of management. In fact, we had a whole bunch of people, if you'll remember, complaining about that particular situation. Now it's beautiful. Everything we need is taken care of. Rents are just an average raise. You know, some people, too, when they think of rent control, they think that whatever they're going to rent, it stays the same, and it doesn't. It goes up every year by a percentage depending on the city. And also I take by income. But we have one young man I talked to today that lives in Los Angeles, a fairly new tenant, but he is paying, they can raise it 6% per year. So just to make it simple, let's say it was $1,000. It's more than that, but it's $1,000, and so you 6%. Now you have he's paying $60 extra per month. They can. The next year, it's 6% of that larger amount. And if you, am I correct?
$72.
Yeah. And normally, if in rent control, the landlord is going to raise it as much as he can because he's stuck with that amount. And we've talked about all these various things like maintenance and housing stock that's available to low income, which certainly would affect it. So, again, it's not that we just say, boom, no rent control. We've really looked at this and through the years. And I know Mr. Weaver's, you've been 11 years on the council? 12 years, and I've been on the Housing Authority 10 years. And it was very serious discussions that we had over a long period of time, and nothing has changed since our initial things. That's the thing. We have nothing new. In fact, the opposite. Now, with the economy like it is, buildings aren't going to be sold like they used to be. So, but I do appreciate, I understand the situation, I understand how you feel about it as a renter, being a renter myself, but rent control is not the answer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mincy. For myself, I don't believe I've moved an inch on this over the years. Sometimes my colleagues speak up here about their tenure on the council as though some of us who've joined the council more recently just fell out of the sky yesterday and landed on the dais. Of course, those that know me better probably wouldn't suggest that I fell out of the sky, but maybe, the other way, I don't know. But the bottom line is, many of us have been following this issue because, in my case, I grew up in this city. I've been a tenant, a rental property in the city. As a matter of fact, it's the first time I crossed Mr. Yusefian's path was my apartment building where I was living for about 10 years in South Glendale, and he was the project manager on the building going up next door. Little did either of us know. Anyway.
And I was very quiet, just to accommodate.
But I've been a tenant, I've been a property owner, I've been an owner of rental property. I don't currently own rental property. In all of those cases, I've not been a supporter of rent control. Now, this motion isn't specifically about rent control, except in the aspect that it's giving us a history of what has occurred, and I think my colleagues and the public has weighed in on that and fleshed that whole story out a bit. Now, I know that at least one of my colleagues is not happy with the idea of the slippery slope, so I won't go near the slope. I'll stay off the slope. I'm not a skier. But let's say that I'm not interested in rent control light either. I just don't. I view this as a form of rent control that is something that is not effective. First of all, if we had an outside organization that was looking at rent mediation and they come to a conclusion, then what? Where is their authority come from to act or do whatever? I have to agree, although I have to agree with the one speaker about getting the local government out of the process, out of this process. Those were my comments in the newspaper the other day. They're still my comments now. I would say that I do believe, contrary to what was mentioned, I do believe that it does affect incentives, rent control in general, incentives that some property owners and landlords avail themselves of. I know the kind of landlord I was. I maintained my rental property as though I were living there. As a matter of fact, I took more time and care maintaining that property than I even had time for my own home. That's how much pride of ownership I had with that. Nonetheless, I recognize not everybody does that, but I think all in all, the process is working, and Mr. Mohill, who spoke early on, would be probably shocked to hear me say these words, but he and I don't always agree or see eye to eye, but I happen to agree with him on that part, which is that, there are places I would love to live, and I can't, parts of this city where I would love to live, I can't afford to live there. Certain cars I'd love to own, I can't afford to buy them. I do what I can afford to do, and I work hard to do that, and I assume most people do. I just don't view this as an area where our council should go. And then, lastly on it, I just want to add this, because I don't want to, through my comments, make it sound like I'm picking on or trying to beat up or create some kind of negative innuendo toward either of my colleagues that have brought the issue up. We have aside from our personal views and our considered views that we express and we vote on up here after hearing from the public, from staff, and from each other in debate, we also have this responsibility that Councilmember Najarian was was describing. We have to sometimes look beyond just our own personal views and look at the broader picture of the constituency that we represent. Mr. Najarian was responding to groups of people who were, it was not just Ms. Unikian. She may have been leading the charge, but there were others that she brought here who came here. And it wasn't just recently. I've heard this a number of times since I've joined the council a year ago, last April, who have had issues related to rent or problems related to their landlords. We simply can't just ignore it because we don't happen to be in their situation. And so they raised the issue to provide some fair and balanced discussion and debate up here. Councilmember Yusefian then asked for it to be agendized, and he knew the kind of potential political damage that might bring him for raising the issue. He raised it anyway because we have these obligations to discuss it. It sounds like a contradiction because I've asked this council, not the Housing Authority, but this council twice during open session to put themselves on the record with regard to rent control. And to a person, each one has said, no, I'm not interested in rent control or placing that on the agenda for discussion. But this issue has been raised, rent mediation. I think I'm very happy that the Housing Authority on which I serve and the council, which I have the honor to chair right now, took the topic on, took the time to do the research and debate it. It's a difficult issue, but we've been debating a lot of difficult issues, and ultimately I hope we come to the right decisions in general. I do think from the sound of it we're going to head there on this one as well. If there are any other comments, I'll take them now. Mr. Weaver.
Yeah, just one. I talked about I didn't care to start going down the slippery slope, and Mr. Najarian corrected me that we already started down the slippery slope with just cause eviction. Based on the comments I've heard here, I'd like to recommend that staff don't give us a report, but nose around and find out if the just cause eviction ordinance is causing problems in the community. If you can't get witnesses, if people are being intimidated, is the process working? If there's more negatives than positives, then you could always bring it to us as a report or an agendized item or whatever. But I'm not asking to see anything here. I'm just hearing the comments, and I think maybe we ought to check into it. Maybe the two we hear tonight are the only ones. I don't know. I don't have a feel for it. But I think staff could look into it.
With that, are there any other...
I think we have 3A for City Council. To note and file.
We have a motion to note and file on 3A, which is the council motion, and no direction on that. Is there any other comment on that before we vote? Okay, Mr. Kasakian, please.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian?
Aye.
Mayor Draymond?
Yes.
Move 3B
for the
Housing Authority note and file report.
Second. Roll call.
Authority members Draymond?
Yes.
Mincy?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Parazian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian?
Aye. Move to adjourn for council?
Second.
Council is adjourned.
Move to adjourn for housing.
Second.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.